It's time for episode 14 of the Mystical Times blog podcast with me, Michele Eve. This episode is called More Ghosts of Gloucestershire. The city of Gloucester has a long and varied history, from the Romans settling there. Aethelred and Aethelflaed, Lady of the Mercians, were both buried at St Oswald's. Franciscan monks and later Dominican friars settled there, and during the Civil War, Royalists tried to take Gloucester but were unable to capture it. These are just a few events from Gloucester's history, but it is no surprise to hear of the hauntings that happen within some of the historic buildings that remain in the city. And here are just two of those hauntings. The Poltergeist of Westgate Street. 37 Westgate Street in Gloucester was once where the local Anglian Windows Company had a branch, but in the late 1980s it was home to some very strange happenings indeed. At a meeting in one of the rooms, all 8 members of staff saw the carpet rise up in the middle. They thought it weird and odd, but just joked about it happening. It wasn't long after that incident that a strange acrid odour was smelt throughout the building. It was so bad that professionals were called in to check the drains, but no source for the odour could be found. Then a large damp patch of a congealed liquid appeared on the ceiling. Again, no explanation could be found as to where it had come from. The office manager, Jean Brown, witnessed the toilet flush handle being pulled up and down as though by an invisible hand. Lights would go off and on throughout the day. Doors would become locked and unlocked as well. Rather than finding these events scary, people were rather annoyed by them. One time, Jean Brown was locked inside the toilet after going to investigate a strange noise she had heard. One of the tenants that lived above the store left after only a month after they moved in, as they had had enough of all the strange happenings. One of the staff, a young woman, was doing overtime in the office, and her sister arrived just before 9 p.m. to pick her up. As the sister entered the showroom where the young woman was waiting for her lift, she saw a figure who was wearing a long robe and had long white hair standing behind the young woman. The sister screamed out what she was seeing, and both sisters ran out of the showroom in fright. The young woman would not go back to the premises and found a new job. It wasn't long after this that a big crash was heard on the stairwell. It turns out that a hand basin that had been left propped up against a door had been thrown down 2 flights of stairs, even though it had to be moved across the landing to get to the stairs. At this point, the owners of the building had approached Gloucester Cathedral to request an exorcism. Whilst the incidents were annoying, they weren't violent, but whatever was causing the activity had become more dangerous. A medium called Philip Seth was to hold a séance at the building. The séance was attended by local journalists and photographers. Seth said he made contact with a middle-aged man who had long white hair and a beard, and who wore a long grey robe. Seth said that this entity was angry, as he felt justice had eluded him when he was alive. This man had died by falling from the building and broke his neck. He did this by his own hand and was trapped in the building, and it was him and his anger that was causing the poltergeist activity. Seth was confident that all the happenings would now stop, as he had spoken to the entity and managed to calm him down. Unfortunately, this was not to work in stopping the poltergeist activity. A new manager for the branch had not long started and would be, at times, working in the building alone. He started hearing weird noises and couldn't find what was causing them. He said whilst being new to the role, he had heard about the rest of the staff hearing things, but until now he hadn't heard anything. Jean Brown said it never used to bother her in hearing all the strange noises, but now was very nervous about going upstairs. But the worst was yet to come. The cafe owner, Steve Pugh, whose cafe was adjacent to the Anglian Windows building, heard a terrible crash, followed by the sound of smashing glass. He saw that a window had been smashed on the 3rd floor of the building, and he rushed over to the business, where he met with Jean Brown, and he asked her what was happening. She said she didn't know, as all the rooms upstairs were bolted shut. So they both went up to the locked rooms, opened them up, and in one of the rooms saw that a large double wardrobe had been moved several feet and was now covering a smashed window. Whatever was haunting the building had smashed the window by pushing the wardrobe into it. After this incident, the medium returned and visited the building and held another séance. This time he said he had made contact with a monk-like figure who was looking for a key, which was said to be lost in the building. During the séance, a telephone was said to be constantly ringing, despite it being an internal line, and no one was using it. The medium said he had placated the spirit of the monk and said things would calm down in time. For some reason, the cafe owner and his friend Robin Ledbury, who was a local hairdresser, felt it would be a good idea to hold an overnight vigil on Halloween in which they would raise money for charity. The medium said this wasn't a good idea, but the two men went ahead with it anyway. The charity who would be benefiting from this overnight vigil would be a charity called The Money Mountain, which a local radio station called 7 Sound hosted. The radio station would be recording the vigil and place their equipment in one of the locked rooms upstairs, only to find it scattered all across the room when they went to retrieve the items. A transmitter had been pushed over, wires removed, and batteries had been disconnected too. Despite this setback, they didn't want to pull out as it was too late notice. Throughout the hours of the vigil, noises, bumps, bangs and crashes were recorded, and lights were constantly flickering on and off. It was around 2 a.m. that a table crashed to the floor, but it had not harmed either of the two men holding the vigil. When it was finally over, the two men said they were glad they had done the vigil, as it had raised around £400, but that they were never going to be doing anything like that again. The poltergeist activity went on for around a year, and I've not been able to find any reports of any further disturbances at this address. The Hauntings of Gloucester Blackfriars. Gloucester Blackfriars was founded in 1239, and the site was built on where there had been a Norman castle. It was a Sir Stephen of Herne Hill who had given the land to the Holy Order, and it became the home and workplace for Dominican monks. These monks were evangelical in how they lived their lives and how they helped the community in and around Gloucestershire. The timber used in the building came from the Forest of Dean, which was given by the then King Henry III. The king was also said to visit Blackfriars many times, but died before the building was consecrated. The monks tended to the poor, sick and needy, whilst undertaking lots of study and evangelizing to the public. By the 14th century, there was around 30 to 40 monks living at Blackfriars. In 1536, King Henry VIII had ordered the dissolution of the monasteries, priories, convents and friaries in England and Wales. Things become near impossible for those monks living at Blackfriars. It caused poverty, and the monks were persecuted. No one was allowed to feed the monks, nor to minister to them. Only 3 monks remained at Blackfriars, and was starved to death as an example to other monks. The buildings and land of Blackfriars was sold to Sir Thomas Bell in 1539 and became his home, and another building on the land became a clothing factory. This was to help the preservation of the buildings to what we can see today, as other monasteries were looted and left to rot. It is the most complete Dominican priory to survive. And now we come to the hauntings. In the 1960s, Blackfriars became under guardianship and was to be restored. The craftsmen who were employed to carry out the restorations began feeling a bit more involved with the history of the building, and a local newspaper was to later report ghostly goings-on. One of the foremen was pictured holding a skull of one of the monks, which was discovered buried in the floor of the church nave. The skull had been sliced across with a sharp instrument, showing what possibly led to the death of the monk. It was after this discovery that one of the craftsmen said he had seen the ghostly figure of a monk running from the nave of the church, and whose head was bleeding and blood was running down the monk's face. Another monk figure was seen by the entrance to the church. Could this have been the same monk? Another craftsman was up on one of the ceiling beams when something made him look up, and he saw the figure of a monk who was stood in an inaccessible place. The figure was then to just disappear. This spooked the craftsman so much, he abandoned his work until he had calmed down from the shock of what he had witnessed. Many of the men working on the site saw the same bent-over figure, as though in prayer, in the area that was later to become the kitchen. Quite a few of the workers who experienced some of the ghostly monk figures would end up quitting their jobs on this site. One of the previous custodians of Blackfriars said that when he would be quietly doing his paperwork in one of the buildings, he would often hear slow and heavy footsteps from the next floor up. He would note what he had heard and just carry on working, as he had become accustomed to hearing these disembodied footsteps. These days you can visit Gloucester Blackfriars, book a private tour, or even get married on the site. Who knows, you might even end up seeing a ghostly figure of a monk too. That's all for episode 14, and I do hope you enjoyed Gloucestershire ghostly accounts. For the next episode, episode 15, I'll be telling some spooky tales that happened around Christmas. And don't forget, if you have a spooky experience, then I want to hear about it. You can email me spooky@mysticaltimesblog.com. Till next time.